The slave market on Station Nexus 7 was the largest in that sector of space. Hundreds of alien species walked through its crowded halls every day, buying and selling everything from rare minerals to living beings. The air smelled like metal and fear, and the lights above flickered with a cold blue glow that made everything look dead. Ambassador Axe of the Dominion stood near the central platform, watching the auction with his 4 yellow eyes. He had no intention of buying today. He simply enjoyed watching others spend their credits on flesh and bone. It reminded him of his own power, his own freedom, and how easily both could be taken away. The auctioneer was a species known for their love of profit and their complete lack of morals. His gray skin glistened under the lights as he called out prices, his thick fingers gesturing toward each new piece of merchandise. Most of the slaves were common species, workers from mining colonies or servants taken from conquered worlds. Nothing special, nothing worth his attention. Then they brought out the human. She walked onto the platform with her hands bound behind her back. Magnetic cuffs held her wrists together, humming softly with energy. She was small compared to most species in the room, standing just under 2 meters tall with brown hair cut short and skin that showed dozens of faded scars. She wore simple gray clothing that hung loose on her lean frame. But it was her eyes that caught the attention of everyone watching. They were brown, ordinary by human standards, but they held no fear, no despair, no submission. She looked at the crowd the same way a predator looks at prey, calm and patient and waiting. The auctioneer cleared his throat and activated his translation device. His voice boomed across the market hall. Lot number 417, species designation human, origin world Sol 3, also known as Earth, classification category 12. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Species were rare in the galactic slave trade. Most of them died during capture or transport, unable to survive the stress of captivity. The few who made it to market were prized for their incredible durability and resistance to harsh conditions. Kate Miller heard the whispers around her but did not react. 6 months ago, she had been living a normal life on Earth, working as a marine biologist on a research vessel off the coast of Maine. She had spent her days studying ocean currents and tracking whale migrations, never imagining that anything existed beyond the stars she watched at night. Then the ship came, a massive vessel that blocked out the moon, descending through the clouds with lights that burned her eyes. She remembered running, screaming, trying to reach the radio to call for help. Then came the light, bright and cold, and she woke up on a metal table surrounded by creatures that looked like something from her worst nightmares. They had poked her and prodded her, taken samples of her blood and tissue, tested her reflexes and her strength. They spoke in languages she could not understand, their alien faces showing emotions she could not read. When they were done, they threw her in a cell with a dozen other humans, all of them taken from different parts of Earth, all of them terrified. One by one, the others were sold. Kate watched them go, watched their hope fade and their spirits break. She made herself a promise in that dark cell. She would not break, she would not beg, she would survive, and she would make them regret the day they took her from her home. The bidding started high. Credits flew back and forth across the room as wealthy buyers competed for the rare specimen. Kate stood motionless on the platform, her face blank, her breathing steady. She counted the exits, noted the positions of the guards, studied the weapons they carried. Information was power, and she intended to gather as much as she could. The winning bid came from a massive reptilian creature near the front of the crowd. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, with dark green scales covering his body and yellow eyes that gleamed with cruel intelligence. His species was called, and they were known across the galaxy as warriors and conquerors. This particular wore the insignia of a ship commander, and his name was Or. He approached the platform with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. His clawed feet clicked against the metal floor, and the crowd parted before him like water before a stone. He climbed the steps and stood before Kate, looking down at her with an expression that mixed curiosity with contempt. "Small," he rumbled, his voice deep and rough like grinding rocks. He reached out and grabbed her chin with his clawed fingers, turning her face from side to side. His grip was strong enough to bruise, but Kate did not flinch. "Weak-looking, but are useful. You will serve on my vessel. You will clean, you will carry, you will do whatever I command. You will obey or you will suffer. Do you understand?" Kate met his gaze without blinking. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she kept her voice calm and steady. "I understand perfectly," she said, "and I am going to give you one warning. Let me go, right now. Walk away and forget you ever saw me, because if you do not, you will regret it for the rest of your very short life." Silence fell over the market. Every alien in the room stared at the small human who had just threatened a commander. Then or laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound that echoed off the metal walls, and his crew joined in, their voices creating a chorus of mockery. Even some of the other buyers chuckled, amused by the absurdity of this tiny creature challenging such a powerful warrior. "I like spirit," Or said when his laughter faded. He released her chin and wiped his claws on his uniform as if touching her had them. "It makes breaking them so much more satisfying. I have broken 1,000 slaves, human, warriors stronger than you, beasts larger than you. All of them learned their place eventually." He turned to his crew and gestured toward the exit. "Bring her to the ship. Put her in the holding cells with the other new acquisitions. We leave within the hour." Two guards grabbed Kate by the arms and began dragging her off the platform. She did not resist. She did not struggle. She simply walked between them, matching their pace, conserving her energy. As they led her through the crowded market toward the docking bay, she looked back over her shoulder at Commander Orr. He was already talking with the auctioneer, probably arranging payment, already forgetting about his new purchase. He had no idea what he had just bought. He thought she was a slave, a piece of property to be used and discarded. He thought her warning was the desperate bravado of a frightened creature trying to seem brave. He was wrong. Kate Miller was not prey. She had never been prey. She came from a world where everything tried to kill you, where survival meant fighting every single day against predators and diseases and disasters. Her ancestors had conquered that world, had bent it to their will through nothing but determination and intelligence and the refusal to ever give up. She would do the same here. The warning had been given. What came next was entirely on them. The warship was called the Crimson Fang, and it was one of the ugliest things Kate had ever seen. The vessel was all sharp angles and exposed weapon systems, designed to intimidate rather than to be beautiful. Red lights glowed along its hull like angry eyes, and the engines hummed with a low vibration that she could feel in her bones. They threw her into a holding cell on the lower decks. The room was small and cold, with metal walls and a hard floor that offered no comfort. A thin mat in one corner served as a bed, and a hole in the floor served as a toilet. The smell was terrible, a mix of chemicals and waste and fear that had soaked into the metal over years of use. Kate sat down on the mat and closed her eyes. She needed to rest. She needed to think. She needed to learn everything she could about this ship and its crew before she made her next move. For the first 3 days, they left her alone. Guards came twice each day to push a bowl of nutrient paste through the slot in her door. The paste tasted like wet cardboard mixed with chalk, but Kate ate every bite. Food was energy, and energy was survival. She would not let them weaken her through starvation. On the 4th day, they put her to work. A young guard with mottled green scales unlocked her cell and gestured for her to follow. His name was, and he was assigned to supervise the lowest workers on the ship. He led her down into the depths of the vessel, through corridors that grew hotter and darker with each step, until they reached the waste processing area. The smell hit her like a physical force. Toxic fumes filled the air, thick enough to make her eyes water and her throat burn. The temperature was extreme, shifting between freezing cold near the intake vents and boiling heat near the processing units. Most species would have died within hours of exposure to these conditions. Kate picked up a cleaning tool and got to work. Watched her with growing confusion as the hours passed. The human should have been struggling. She should have been gasping for breath, collapsing from heat exhaustion, begging for relief. Instead, she worked steadily, methodically, handling chemicals that would have burned through his scales and lifting containers that should have been too heavy for her small frame. "How are you doing this?" he asked finally, unable to hide his curiosity. Kate wiped sweat from her forehead and looked at him. "Doing what?" "Surviving. The conditions here would kill most species within a single rotation. The heat alone should have stopped your heart by now." Kate almost smiled, almost. Earth has places hotter than this, deserts where the sand burns your feet and the sun cooks you alive, and places colder too where the ice never melts and the wind cuts through your skin like knives. My people have lived in all of them. We adapted. We survived. She picked up another container and carried it to the processing unit. "My ancestors crossed frozen oceans in wooden boats. They climbed mountains taller than your tallest buildings. They survived plagues that killed half their population and came back stronger. They hunted predators with nothing but sharp sticks and courage. Every single human alive today is descended from survivors. It is in our blood. It is in our bones. We do not know how to give up. Said nothing, but something changed in his eyes. The contempt was still there, but it was mixed now with something that looked almost like respect, or maybe fear. Word spread through the ship over the following days. The human was strange. The human was tough. The human worked in conditions that should have killed her and asked for more. Crew members found excuses to visit the lower decks, just to watch her work, just to see if the rumors were true. Commander or heard the whispers. He did not like them. On the 10th day, he summoned Kate to the command deck. The bridge of the Crimson Fang was a circular room filled with control panels and display screens. Armed officers stood at attention around the edges, and in the center sat Commander, or on a throne-like chair that elevated him above everyone else. His yellow eyes tracked Kate as she was brought before him, still wearing her dirty work clothes, still bearing the magnetic cuffs on her wrists. "I hear you have been impressing my crew," he said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "They speak of you in the corridors. They whisper about the human who does not break. Perhaps you think this makes you special. Perhaps you have forgotten your place." Kate stood before him in silence. She did not speak. She did not bow. She simply waited. "I think a demonstration is in order," or continued. He gestured to a standing nearby. "Show our guest what happens to slaves who forget themselves." Stepped forward with a smile that showed too many teeth. In his clawed hand he held a neural whip, a weapon designed to overload pain receptors without causing permanent damage. It was the preferred tool of slavers across the galaxy, perfect for breaking spirits while keeping bodies intact. He activated the whip. Energy crackled along its length, blue and hungry. Then he struck. The pain was extraordinary. It shot through Kate's nervous system like lightning, setting every nerve on fire, demanding that she scream and fall and beg for mercy. Her muscles locked up. Her vision went white. For a moment that lasted an eternity, there was nothing in the universe except agony. But Kate Miller had given birth to a daughter 12 years ago, alone in a cabin during a blizzard with no doctor and no drugs. She had broken her leg while hiking in the mountains and crawled 3 miles to reach help. She had survived a car accident that killed 2 people and spent 6 months in physical therapy learning to walk again. She knew pain. Pain was an old friend. Her vision cleared. Her muscles relaxed. She was still standing. She looked at with something in her eyes that made his smile falter. "That all you got?" The command deck went silent. Every in the room stared at the small human who had just taken a hit from a neural whip and asked for more, looked at his commander, uncertain, or nodded grimly. Struck again and again and again. Each blow was worse than the last. Each one should have left Kate writhing on the floor, screaming, broken. Instead, she absorbed the pain, processed it, and remained standing. Her hands were shaking. Blood dripped from her lip where she had bitten it to keep from crying out, but she was still on her feet. By the 10th strike was breathing harder than she was. His arm ached. His confidence was gone. "Enough," Orr said. His voice was calm, but something had changed in his eyes. "Return her to her quarters." Guards grabbed Kate by the arms and began dragging her toward the exit. She could barely walk, her legs trembling with each step, but she forced herself to look back at the commander. "That was your second chance," she said, her voice rough but steady. "I do not give thirds." They threw her back into her cell and locked the door. Kate collapsed onto her mat and let herself shake, let herself hurt, let herself be human for just a moment. Then she started planning. 2 weeks passed aboard the Crimson Fang. Kate returned to her work in the waste processing area, and the crew learned to leave her alone. No more summons to the command deck. No more demonstrations. Commander or seemed content to pretend she did not exist, and that suited Kate perfectly. She used the time well. Every day she mapped more of the ship in her mind. She memorized corridor layouts and ventilation shaft locations. She noted which doors required access codes and which could be forced open manually. She tracked guard rotations, learning which crew members were lazy and which were alert, which ones drank too much during their off hours and which ones stayed sharp. She also found allies. Not all the cargo on the Crimson Fang was. The ship carried slaves from a dozen different worlds, beings who had been captured and broken by years of cruelty. They worked in the shadows of the vessel, cleaning and repairing and serving, invisible to their masters. Kate began reaching out to them in stolen moments. There was a female whose crystalline body shimmered with inner light. Her species was fragile but intelligent, and she had been a scientist before the slavers took her. She flinched at sudden movements and spoke in a voice like wind chimes, soft and sad. There were the twins, massive beings with gray skin and 4 arms each. Their names were and Bren, and they had been farmers on there before the raided their colony. Despite their size and strength, they were gentle creatures who hated violence. The slavers had beaten that gentleness into submission. There were others too. A navigator with broken wings, a healer whose hands had been burned so she could not use her gifts, a young creature of a species Kate did not recognize, who communicated only through colors that flickered across his skin. Kate talked to them all. She listened to their stories. She learned their skills, and slowly, carefully, she began to plant seeds of hope. "Your species?" asked one night, speaking through the thin wall that separated their cells. "The stories the guards tell about, are they true?" Kate pressed her hand against the cold metal. "What stories?" "They say your world is a monster. They say everything on Earth tries to kill you. The water, the air, the plants, the animals. They say your sun gives you cancer and your gravity crushes your bones. They say you should not exist at all." Kate smiled in the darkness. "That is all true, and worse. We have storms that flatten cities and waves that swallow ships. We have diseases that have killed millions and earthquakes that can crack the planet open. We have predators with teeth longer than my arm and poisons that can kill with a single touch." "How do you survive?" asked genuine wonder in her voice. "We adapted, we learned, we fought back." Kate paused, choosing her next words carefully. "On Earth we have a saying, what does not kill you makes you stronger. My people have been dying on that world for millions of years. Every generation that survived passed down their strength to the next. We are the product of endless selection. The weak died, the strong lived. And now here we are, the descendants of survivors, carrying all that strength in our blood." There was silence from the other side of the wall. Then spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "The guards are afraid of you. I have seen it in their eyes. They try to hide it, but they cannot. What are you planning, Kate Miller?" Kate leaned closer to the wall. "I am planning to leave this ship, and I am planning to take everyone who wants to come with me, but I need help. I need people I can trust. Can I trust you?" Another long silence. When finally answered, there was something new in her voice, something that had been dead for a long time and was now flickering back to life. "What do you need me to do?" Over the following days, Kate built her network. She communicated through whispers and hand signals, through notes passed during work shifts and messages scratched into walls. She assigned tasks based on each person's skills, used her scientific knowledge to identify weaknesses in the ship's systems. The twins mapped the cargo holds and supply areas. The navigator, despite his broken wings, still remembered the layout of the shuttle bay. The plan came together piece by piece, like a puzzle slowly revealing its picture. The opportunity arrived 3 weeks after Kate's capture, when the Crimson Fang docked at a remote refueling station. Commander Orr left the ship with most of his senior officers to negotiate a weapons deal, leaving only a skeleton crew behind. It was the moment Kate had been waiting for. She spent her morning shift in the waste processing area as usual, giving the guards no reason to suspect anything was wrong. But this time she was not just cleaning, she was searching. Her fingers closed around a piece of scrap metal hidden behind one of the processing units. She had spotted it weeks ago and had been slowly sharpening it against the floor of her cell every night. The edge was not perfect, but it would do. She hid the weapon in her sleeve and continued working until her shift ended. The guards escorted her back toward her cell as they always did. 2, walking on either side of her, bored and careless. They had made this walk 100 times. They expected to make it 100 more. They were wrong. Kate moved without warning. Her hand came up from her sleeve, and the sharpened metal drove into the gap between the first guard's neck scales. She had studied anatomy during her time on the ship, learning where their scales were thick and where they were vulnerable. The gap between neck and shoulder was their weak point. The guard collapsed without a sound. The second guard turned at the movement, his eyes widening in shock. His hand reached for his weapon, but Kate was already moving. She grabbed the first guard's body and used it as a shield as she closed the distance. It was bigger than her, stronger than her, but she was faster. Earth's gravity was nearly twice what his species had evolved under. She had spent her entire life carrying that weight, and it had made her quick. She drove her weapon into his throat before he could call for help. 2 bodies lay on the corridor floor. Kate stood over them, breathing hard, her hands covered in dark blood. She felt no guilt. These were slavers who had tortured and killed countless innocent beings. They deserved what they got. She took their weapons, she took their communicators, she took their access cards. Then she went to free the others. The uprising had begun. The slave quarters were located on the lowest deck of the Crimson Fang, far from the command center and the crew quarters. They kept their cargo in darkness, packed into small cells like animals, forgotten until they were needed. It was the perfect place to start a revolution. Kate moved through the corridors like a ghost. She had memorized the patrol patterns weeks ago, and she knew exactly when and where the guards would be. The access card she had taken from the dead crew member opened every door she needed. The first cell she unlocked belonged to. The female stumbled out, her crystalline body flickering with surprised light. Kate pressed a finger to her lips and handed her one of the stolen plasma pistols. "Do you know how to use this?" Kate whispered. Looked at the weapon in her hands. Her species was not known for violence. They were scientists and artists, creators rather than destroyers, but something had hardened in her eyes during her time in captivity. "I will learn," she said. They moved through the detention area together, unlocking cells one by one. The twins emerged with fire in their eyes, their massive bodies trembling with barely contained rage. The navigator stretched his broken wings and nodded grimly. The healer, whose burned hands could no longer channel her gifts, picked up a metal bar from the floor and gripped it tight. Some of the prisoners were too broken to join. They cowered in their cells, unable to believe that freedom was possible, convinced that this was some cruel trick designed to give them hope before crushing it. Kate did not force them. She simply told them to stay quiet and moved on. When she finished, 17 freed slaves stood behind her in the corridor. They were weak and malnourished and terrified, but they were also angry. Years of suffering had filled them with a fury that had nowhere to go until now. "Listen to me," Kate said, keeping her voice low. "We have maybe 20 minutes before someone notices the missing guards. The shuttle bay is on deck 4. We get there, we take a shuttle, and we leave. Anyone who wants off this ship follows me. Anyone who wants to stay keeps their head down and their mouth shut. Understood?" 17 heads nodded. "Then let us move." Kate led them through the ship with stolen access codes and ruthless efficiency. Every guard they encountered was dealt with quickly and quietly. The twins used their massive strength to overpower enemies before they could raise an alarm. Proved surprisingly accurate with the plasma pistol, her scientific precision translating into deadly aim. Even the broken prisoners found courage they did not know they had. The bodies piled up behind them. Kate felt nothing except cold determination. These had chosen to be slavers. They had chosen to profit from the suffering of others. They had made their choice, and now they were facing the consequences. They reached the shuttle bay, just as the alarms began to wail. Someone had finally noticed the missing guards. Red lights flashed along the corridors, and a harsh voice echoed through the ship's speakers, calling all crew to combat stations. The element of surprise was gone. The shuttle bay was a large open space filled with various small craft. 3 guards stood near the main entrance, their weapons drawn, their eyes scanning the shadows. They knew something was wrong, but they did not know what. Not yet. Kate assessed the situation in a heartbeat. The distance was too far for an ambush. The guards were too alert for stealth. There was only one option left. "Go," she said to the others, pressing the plasma pistol into his hands. "Get to the shuttle on the far left. It is the fastest one. I will handle this." The larger of the twins grabbed her arm. "There are 3 of them. You cannot fight 3 alone." Kate looked up at his worried face and smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had stopped being afraid a long time ago. "Watch me." She walked into the shuttle bay like she owned it. The guards spotted her immediately and raised their weapons, shouting commands she ignored. She kept walking, steady and calm, closing the distance with every step. The first guard fired. Kate had already moved, diving to the side and rolling behind a cargo container. The plasma bolt burned through the air where she had been standing a moment before. She came up running, using the containers as cover, zigzagging toward her targets. The guards tried to track her, but she was too fast. Earth's heavy gravity had made her quick, and years of surviving on it had given her instincts that bordered on supernatural. She could feel the shots coming before they arrived, sense the guards' movements before they made them. She reached the first guard before he could react. Her stolen knife punched through the weak point under his arm, and he fell with a strangled cry. She grabbed his rifle as he collapsed and used it to block the second guard's strike. They struggled for a moment, locked together, strength against strength. There was bigger and stronger, but Kate fought like something from a nightmare. She bit and clawed and twisted, finding every vulnerable spot his scales did not cover. When he finally threw her off, she took his rifle with her. She shot him before he could recover. The third guard came at her with a blade, screaming with rage. Kate the first swung and ducked under the second. Her hand closed around a piece of debris on the floor, and she drove it into his eye. He screamed and stumbled back, and she finished him with a shot to the chest. Silence fell over the shuttle bay. Kate stood among three fallen enemies, breathing hard, covered in blood that was not her own. She looked up to see her allies staring at her with expressions that mixed awe and fear. "The shuttle," she said, her voice steady, "now." They scrambled to obey. The navigator took the controls, his broken wings trembling but his hands sure. The engines hummed to life, and the shuttle began to rise from the bay floor. More guards burst through the entrance just as the bay doors opened. They fired at the escaping shuttle, but they were too late. The small craft shot through the opening and into the darkness of space, leaving the Crimson Fang behind. Inside the shuttle, 17 former slaves cheered and wept and held each other. They were free. Against all odds, against all reason, they were actually free. Kate did not celebrate. She moved to a console and began typing, her fingers flying across the alien keyboard. She had one more message to send. When Commander Orr returned to his ship hours later, he found a scene of carnage. 8 guards dead, 17 slaves escaped, and a message scratched into the wall of the shuttle bay, written in the trade language of the galaxy. "I gave you one warning, this was the second." He stared at those words for a long time. For the first time in his life, he felt afraid. The escaped slaves scattered across the galaxy like seeds carried by the wind. Some returned to there to rebuild the lives that had been stolen from them. Others found new homes on neutral stations where the slavers could not reach them. But wherever they went, they carried a story with them. The story of the girl who refused to break. Returned to her people and told anyone who would listen. She described the human who had worked in toxic fumes that should have killed her, who had stood against a neural whip without screaming, who had fought 3 warriors and won. Her crystalline body flickered with light as she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of things she had witnessed with her own eyes. The twins went back to their farming colony and gathered the survivors of the raid. They told their story around campfires, their deep voices rumbling through the night. The young ones listened with wide eyes, asking questions about the human who had set them free. "Is she still out there? Is she coming back? Will she help us?" The answer to all 3 questions came 6 months after the escape from the Crimson Fang. A news broadcast reached every corner of the civilized galaxy, carrying a message that would change everything. The transmission showed a simple stage in a neutral diplomatic station, surrounded by cameras and recording devices. A small group of beings stood on that stage, former slaves who had agreed to tell their story publicly. And at the center of them stood Kate Miller. She looked different from the beaten captive who had been sold at the slave market. Her hair had grown out, falling past her shoulders in brown waves. Her body had recovered its strength, fed by proper nutrition and rest. She wore simple clothing, dark pants and a gray shirt, nothing fancy or intimidating. But her eyes were the same, calm and steady and utterly unafraid. She stepped up to the microphone and began to speak. Her voice was clear and strong, projected through translators to every species watching. 6 months ago, I was taken from my home. I was sold like property. I was beaten and tortured and told that I was nothing. The beings who did this to me thought they knew what I was. They looked at my small body and my soft skin and they saw prey. They saw weakness. They saw something to be used and discarded. She paused, letting the words sink in. They were wrong. The camera zoomed in on her face, and 1 billion alien viewers saw something in her eyes that made them shiver. I'm not special. I'm not unique. I'm not some exceptional hero who rose above her species. I'm just one human from one planet in one corner of a very big galaxy. But here is what the galaxy needs to understand. There are 8 billion humans on Earth. 8 billion beings who grew up on a world that tried to kill them every single day. We were forged in the fires of that should have destroyed us, and instead it made us strong. She turned slightly, gesturing to the former slaves behind her. These are the ones who escaped with me. 17 people from 17 different worlds, all of them victims of the slave trade that poisons this sector of space. Some of them will never fully recover from what was done to them. Some of them have nightmares every night. Some of them jump at shadows and flinch from loud noises. But they are alive. They are free. And they are proof that the slavers are not as powerful as they want you to believe. Kate faced the cameras directly. The slave trade in this sector ends now. That is not a request. It is not a negotiation. It is not an offer that can be refused. Any ship that carries slaves, any station that hosts auctions, any world that profits from the suffering of others will answer to Earth. We are coming for our people. We are coming for everyone's people. And unlike me, Earth does not give warnings. Behind her, a holographic display flickered to life. The image showed a section of space near the neutral station, empty and dark. Then lights began appearing, ships dropping out of hyperspace, one after another, forming a fleet that grew larger with every passing second. Human ships, military vessels bearing the insignia of Earth's United Defense Force, accompanied by allied craft from a dozen worlds that had answered humanity's call. The broadcast showed the reactions across the galaxy. On the military commanders gathered in stunned silence, watching the fleet assemble. On stations, ambassadors called emergency meetings. On slaver ships throughout the sector, captains began calculating the odds and finding them deeply unfavorable. Commander or watched from the bridge of the Crimson Fang, his claws digging into the arms of his command chair. The fleet on the screen was larger than anything he had ever faced, and at its head flew a human dreadnought that dwarfed even the largest warship. "What do we do?" asked, his voice barely a whisper. Or did not answer. He was remembering a small human woman standing before him, hands bound, covered in dirt, looking at him without an ounce of fear. He was remembering her words, delivered in a voice as calm as still water. "I am going to give you one warning." He had laughed at her. He had dismissed her. He had thought her warning was the desperate bravado of a helpless creature. He understood now. The warning had not been desperate. It had not been bravado. It had been a simple statement of fact, delivered by someone who knew exactly what was coming. She had tried to tell him. She had given him a chance, and he had been too arrogant to listen. Back on the broadcast stage, Kate was finishing her speech. Her voice carried across the stars, reaching every corner of the galaxy. "My name is Kate Miller. I'm a marine biologist from a small state called Maine, on a planet called Earth. I am nobody special, but I come from a species that never learned how to give up. A species that conquered its and reached for the stars. A species that will tear down every slaver ship in the galaxy if that is what it takes to bring its people home." She leaned closer to the microphone. "To everyone who is still in chains, hold on. We are coming for you. To everyone who put them in chains, you have one choice. Release your captives and surrender or face the consequences. You have seen what one human can do. You do not want to see what billions of us can accomplish when we set our minds to it." She stepped back from the microphone. The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, the slave trade began to collapse. Ships released their cargo rather than face the approaching fleet. Auctions closed their doors. Buyers and sellers disappeared into the darkness, hopping to escape the storm that was coming. And in the silence of space, humanity advanced and left their enemies without words. The girl had given one warning. The second had left them silent. And Earth never needed a third.